Over the course of military history, two elements have been locked in an ongoing struggle for battlefield dominance: firepower and maneuverability. True battlefield potency is achieved when you're able to take your firepower, your army, and maneuver it through a war zone to gain a positional advantage. But in the 70 years before the start of World War I, the technology of firepower had advanced at a much greater rate than maneuverability, which still plodded along at the speed of a horse. That would all begin to change during World War I, with the emergence of an array of new technologies, at the heart of which was the revolutionary internal combustion engine. And with these technologies came war machines designed to restore the balance. Machines that matched the advances of weapons with an ability to move men faster, more efficiently, and more safely. This is the story of movement. The disparity between mobility and firepower was no more starkly evident than during the Gallipoli landings of 1915. The first major amphibious operation of World War I followed a centuries-old tradition. And in the pre-dawn of April the 25th, a flotilla of wooden boats began quietly rowing men ashore from transport vessels anchored 500 meters away. But as they slowly came within range of the beach, all hell broke loose.
Essentially, each lifeboat could carry up to 28 diggers. And they were all compressed in there like sardines, and they were under enemy fire.
Heavy shelling and gunfire rained down, and the men in those wooden boats were helpless.
What was notable about the Gallipoli landings was the rate at which the troops could get on the ground and start fighting. They were limited by the fact that they had to climb over the side of the boat.
The days of amphibious operations led by rowboats were over. But soon, a new type of vessel for moving men ashore would emerge. While the Second World War provided the Allies with the same problems faced at Gallipoli, they were on a much grander scale. How to deploy entire armies and supplies to a continent where all the major ports were in the enemy's control. Enter the American boat-building entrepreneur Andrew Higgins and his design, the LCVP. Higgins answered the call of the U.S. Marines to construct a vessel that could perform well in the open sea and deliver a company of 36 fully equipped soldiers onto unprepared beaches. Based on a design used in the shallow waters of the Louisiana bayous, the initial landing craft personnel, or LCP, could operate effectively in just 45 centimeters of water, land its bow ashore, and remove itself to deeper water as needed. This initial design was adequate, but required men and supplies to be unloaded over the sides, a tactical nightmare considering the dangers of amphibious landings.
So they decided to use a deployable ramp which fell down, which allowed a rapid evacuation of the craft. And that meant that the troops could get straight onto the beach and start fighting as soon as possible.
What's more, they could be equipped with 2 Browning machine guns at the rear to provide covering fire while unloading. This design became known as the Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, LCVP, or Higgins Boat for short. With its ability to carry a full complement of 36 combat-ready infantry, it would play a vital role in the D-Day landings of 1944. Close to 2,000 Higgins boats were employed in those landings. So critical was the role they played that after the war, Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower declared that Higgins is the man who won the war for us. But the Higgins boat was not the only amphibious landing craft that would play a vital role in the war. In virtually every theater of World War II, the Allies were compelled to launch amphibious operations. But arriving onto land from the sea presented the question of how to assist troops as they negotiated that most treacherous element of any beach landing, the open expanse of the beach itself.
Remember, landing craft can only get you onto the beach. To get from the beach into, say, cover, if you have to carry things, you're vulnerable. So in 1942, the Americans, of course, invented an amphibious truck. And this was the DUKW, known, of course, as the Duck.
The Duck exemplified one of the most remarkable traits of the American war effort: rapid manufacturing adaptability. Rather than create an all-new vehicle from scratch, they took the proven CCKW 2.5-ton truck, the logistical backbone of the Allied war effort, fitted a boat-like hull to the existing drive chain and chassis, and then added a rear propeller and bilge pumps, both powered through a transfer case.
So it can drive on the road as normal, and the good thing about it, it could swim.
The DUKW, of course, is inherently a ludicrous device. This is a truck that floats, you're kidding me. And the American Armed Forces initially rejected it. It just happened that an experimental model happened to be on the coast of Massachusetts when there was a hurricane in 1942, and there happened to be a Coast Guard patrol vessel that had got into difficulty, and the boats couldn't reach it, but the DUKW was able to literally swim out, pick up the crew, bring them back. And after that, all of the objections to the DUKW concept were disappeared.
And when it was introduced into service, it was a revelation.
Because it goes both on sand and mud and on coral and on roads, it needs wheels that can change their tire pressure. How do you do that? The Americans have this thing called a Spears device, common in cars today, which enables the driver of the DUKW to vary the tire pressure of his wheels. So in lots of ways, the DUKW confronted and solved a whole host of technical problems.
Over 20,000 ducks were produced, and they saw service in every campaign until war's end. Able to reach 80 kilometers per hour on land, and with a range of 650 kilometers, which allowed them to continue supply as the main front advanced, the Duck is often referred to as one of the machines that won the war.
The DUKW was immediately a massive success because at landings like Normandy, the Dragoon landings in the south of France, the further Italian landings right through the Italian campaign.
But where it really earned its stripes was in the war in the Pacific, fighting alongside another amphibious vehicle that would prove invaluable. Its more heavily armed and armored cousin, the Landing Vehicle Tract. Perhaps the most memorable of all land battles in the Pacific was the Battle of Iwo Jima. On February 19, 1945, the largest American naval force ever assembled in the Pacific began its attack on the small island, part of an inner ring of Japanese defenses designed to prevent an American invasion. Anticipating an amphibious war, the Americans understood that simple landing barges would not cross the coral reefs and sandbars that fringed most Pacific islands. And the boggy volcanic sand of the beaches often ruled out wheeled vehicles for the initial assault. Based on a tracked civilian vehicle designed to navigate the swampy terrains of the Florida Everglades, the LVT provided a solution.
The LVT was a landing craft that was fitted with tracks.
With tracks, you have 2 points of contact on the ground over a large area, so your ground pressure is a lot lower.
So whereas wheels would get stuck, tracks are still able to keep the vehicle moving forward.
With the capacity to transport 6 crew and 30 troops, the LVT was powered by a 7-cylinder, 186-kilowatt radial engine. The addition of a rear folding ramp meant that light vehicles and artillery systems could be carried, further enhancing the LVT's capability. With the rear ramp in place, troops and vehicles could exit with relative safety using the hull, which was covered in 13mm armor as a shield.
And that is so important with a landing craft. The reason being is that very often you're landing under duress. You're landing under conditions of enemy fire.
Initially a supply and transport vehicle, when experience pointed to the LVT's offensive potential, 2 30mm and 2 50mm guns were fitted forward and rear of the loading area. Updates continued with gun turrets and suspension lifted from the Stuart Light tank. It was another example of American manufacturing adaptability. Nearly 20,000 LVTs were produced, an all-new kind of infantry fighting vehicle that played a central role in the Battle of Iwo Jima, a costly battle that lasted a month before U.S. Marines claimed victory. The LVT-4, the variant used with such success during the month-long Battle of Iwo Jima, continued in service after World War II and was superseded by the massive 40-ton LVTP-5. It, in turn, was replaced in the early 70s by the LVTP-7, a family of vehicles known by troops as the Amtrak, or Battle Bus. And in 1984, a shift in capability and tactical use, leaning more toward all-round fighting capability, led to a name change. No longer principally a landing vehicle, the LVTP-7 became an amphibious assault vehicle and was redesignated the AAV.
The amphibious assault vehicle is a fairly substantial improvement on its historical predecessors, such as the LVT and the W. The revolutionary aspects of the design are based on 3 things. Firstly, it's protection. So it has an aluminium hull, but also it is able to be fitted with a ceramic-based applique armor.
Made from sandwich-plated steel, combined with an underlayer of Kevlar, the enhanced applique armor kit provides protection against small arms of up to 14.5mm and anti-material shell fragments.
The second point is its speed.
With a weight of just 24 tons, the AAV, operated by a 3-man crew, can transport 25 combat-loaded Marines on roads at speeds of 72 kilometers per hour. War doesn't wait for weather, and the pronounced bow of the fully battened-down AAV can withstand swells of up to 4 meters. And it can do this traveling at speeds of up to 8 knots, propelled by the vehicle's tracks, which are assisted by a pair of water jets fitted to the rear of the track idlers. All round, this represents almost a doubling of speed and seagoing ability than that achieved by the LVT-4.
The third aspect of this vehicle is its range, in that it's able to travel up to 480 kilometers on a single tank of fuel.
A range double that of the World War II LVT-4. The roofline features a turret equipped with an M2 50 caliber machine gun and an MK19 40mm automatic grenade launcher that can accurately strike targets at a range of 1.5 kilometers. AAVs have powered ashore in a variety of conflicts, including the first Gulf War. And while it has developed into a highly adaptable battlefield weapon, it is still very much an amphibious vehicle, capable on land, but not of the land. To reinforce an amphibious assault and continue that attack on land, requires vehicles with both high levels of armor and heavy-duty firepower. And to deliver these vehicles from ship to shore requires a heavy-duty landing craft, like the LCAC.
The landing craft air cushion is a huge hovercraft, and it's awesome. It's able to carry up to 188 troops, over 60 tons of payloads. That means that it can take an M1 Abrams from ship to shore.
Launched from the floodable well deck of multi-purpose amphibious assault ships, the LCAC is powered by 4 12,000 kilowatt turbines, has a top speed of over 70 kilometers per hour, and a range of up to 550 kilometers.
The revolutionary thing about the LCAC is that it can be deployed from a ship up to over 50 kilometers away. So that means it can traverse from a point which is over the horizon from the destination. That means that your expensive assets, the large ships that deploy this craft, are protected from enemy fire.
The LCAC also has survivability built in. While the 4 main engines are all used for lift and propulsion, the craft can continue to operate at reduced capability with 2 engines inoperable.
The other advantage of the LCAC is it can be deployed almost anywhere. In fact, it's able to be deployed on around 80% of the world's coastlines.
Due to its tremendous capability over hazardous terrain, a small army can be deployed beyond the beach in secure landing areas, where they are less vulnerable to enemy counterattacks. And among that force would be a number of armored personnel carriers. Just as amphibious vehicles have had to evolve to meet the challenges of getting soldiers to the battlefield, land-based troop transport has had to adapt the way it moves them on it. At the turn of the 20th century, motor vehicles had yet to gain military acceptance, and aviation was in its infancy. Just as rowboats were the accepted method for amphibious landings, trains and horses were the traditional tools used to move men and equipment on land. But railways follow static routes, and horses are flesh and blood. And it was this lack of flexibility and speed that contributed to the stalemate that was World War I, a costly impasse that lasted for over 4 years. But as the reliability and power output of the internal combustion engine improved, new ways of transporting men began to emerge.
World War I was the first major conflict where vehicles were starting to be used. And the main advantage of a truck is that it's a little bit more resilient than a live animal.
In the Scientific American magazine of July 1916, an article appeared describing the French efforts to defend the citadel city of Verdun. As if surprised, it reported that it was here then that the motor transport performed its miracle of bringing up 250,000 men, supplying this great force with food and ammunition, and removing the wounded. It went on to say that it was the first time in the history of the world that any army was entirely dependent on motor transportation. The narrow road to Verdun was later renamed the Sacred Way to commemorate its vital contribution to the war effort. But while trucks and buses became increasingly used in World War I to move men to and from the battle zone, movement on the battlefield itself remained relatively static.
And of course, at that time, breakdowns in trucks were quite commonplace.
It wasn't until World War II that the geographic scale of warfare meant that the mass movement of men across the battlefield by motorized vehicles would no longer be a fallback plan, but a necessity. It was the German blitzkrieg of 1939 and 1940 that first clearly demonstrated the tactical advantages of coordinated, motorized battlefield transport.
Blitzkrieg is a term basically for lightning war. So you want to hit one spot very quickly and fast. So you essentially just break through.
To achieve success, Blitzkrieg relied on specialized vehicles to transport troops and supplies. Specialized vehicles known as Hanomags, a family of half-track troop transports. Perhaps the most famous and widely used of those German machines was the ST KFZ 251. A robust and reliable half-track that weighed 9 tons, had a top speed of 55 kilometers per hour, and a range of over 300 kilometers.
It had the maneuverability of a wheeled vehicle, but still had the load carrying capacity of a tracked vehicle over soft and boggy ground.
By combining track drive with steering wheels, the Hanomag was able to ford close to a meter of water and cope with all but the most treacherous terrain.
The German half-track was a troop carrier, so it principally was designed specifically to get 10 troops to the front, to the action, to where the battle was, under the protection of steel armor.
Operated by a 2-man crew, the Hanomag was armored with 14.5 millimeter thick front-facing steel plates that were steeply angled, and V-shaped plates of 8 millimeter thickness on the sides, providing more than adequate protection against small arms and machine gun fire.
What's interesting about the half-track is the armor plating that's used. And if you look at a half-track, it has these angled plates. Now, there is benefit there from a ballistic protection point of view, because as the bullet travels through an oblique plate, it has the tendency to turn, and what that does is that takes energy out of the bullet.
The Hanomags were central to the success of the Blitzkrieg, and at least 15,000 were produced in a number of variants during the course of the war. The Allies, too, used half-tracks, and perhaps the best known of those was the American M3, which was almost identical to the Hanomag in both specification and production numbers. The M3 would go on to serve with the U.S. Army through both Korea and Vietnam. But the speed and weapons of warfare eventually outpaced vehicles like the Hanomag and the M3. And a new generation of faster, more heavily armored land transport emerged in the early 80s with the M2 Bradley. The U.S. Marine Corps described their fighting philosophy as seeking to shatter the enemy's cohesion through a variety of rapid, focused, and unexpected actions. That philosophy, put more simply, reads, move men and armor quickly. Powered by an 8-cylinder diesel engine and operated by a crew of 3, the M2 Bradley can carry a squad of 7 combat-ready infantry at a maximum road speed of 65 kilometers per hour across an operational range of 450 kilometers. This fulfills one of the main design objectives of the M2 Bradley, which was to keep pace with the Abrams battle tank, with which it often fights in formation. However, speed in battle is not the only consideration for armored personnel carriers.
Whenever you're transporting troops from one location to the next, then you need to get there as quickly as possible. The less time you spend on the road, the less likelihood there is of being hit.
Of course, speed is worthless without maneuverability. And the M2 rides on a torsion bar suspension system with a track that sits on 6 double-tired road wheels, giving the 36-ton vehicle exceptional all-terrain capability. And that mobility is matched by protection.
If you look at something like an RPG-7, which has an 89mm diameter cone, that can penetrate up to about 300mm of rolled homogeneous armor steel. So it's a very deadly threat indeed. And of course, most armored vehicles, such as tanks, they don't have 300 millimeters of steel on their hulls to provide the level of protection that they require. And so you need another means of providing protection.
To combat this, the M2 has been upgraded with additional applique steel armor and the latest explosive reactive armor, which consists of 96 tiles fixed to the sides, turret, and front of the vehicle, which effectively enhance protection against a variety of anti-armor munitions, like the RPG-7. While their main mission is to provide protected transport to a squad of troops to and from critical points on the battlefield, the M2 can provide supporting fire with an array of cannons, machine guns, and even the TOW anti-tank guided missile system. The M2 Bradley has experienced continued success since its introduction in 1981. Yet the Bradley was developed at the height of the Cold War, around the expectation that if a war were to take place, it would likely be a high-intensity conflict in Europe, fought along traditional lines. However, recent conflicts in the Middle East and elsewhere have proved to be, in many ways, anything but traditional. The changing conditions have demanded a fast, adaptable vehicle to meet new battlefield challenges. And that vehicle is the 8-wheeled IAV Striker.
Protected mobility vehicle. And the idea is that it's there to transport troops very quickly from one location to the other.
Providing armored protection for a 2-man crew and a squad of 9 infantry soldiers. Everything about the Striker is designed for speed, adaptability, and survivability. Its 8 wheels can be switched on the fly between 4-wheel drive on made roads to 8x8 configuration for rough terrain, where it can achieve speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour. But the 8-wheel design is more than just a novelty. It follows a modern trend based on battlefield experience.
One of the interesting design features of the Striker is that it has multiple wheels. It has 8 wheels. So that means once it goes over a mine, and if that mine goes off and you lose a wheel station, it doesn't kill your mobility. And that can be essential if you're trying to get out of a very hot spot on the battlefield. Tracks, on the other hand, if you run over a mine and you destroy your track, then that means that you've lost your mobility and effectively you're a sitting duck.
Less an armored fighting vehicle like the Bradley and more a counterinsurgency weapon, being wheeled, the Striker is far quieter on approach, giving the troops far greater opportunity of overwhelming their objective by stealth. Of course, protection is paramount for a vehicle designed to deliver troops to the heart of battle. And while the Striker is heavily armored, combat experience in Iraq pointed towards the need for countermeasures against the anti-tank weapons it encountered. And so the Striker was retrofitted with a cage of slat armor. But perhaps the greatest advantage of the Striker, compared to the Bradley, is its weight.
At the back end of the Cold War, the US Army was specifically looking for a vehicle that they could deploy very quickly around the world. And mass is a very big consideration when you're looking at deployability. That is, that you want to reduce the weight of your vehicle as much as possible, but still maintain features like good levels of protection, perhaps in some cases, good levels of lethality. And the IAV Striker is one vehicle that had the possibility of offering those.
While the Striker is lethal, with a universal mount that can accept the remote weapon station, a modular unit which can fit a variety of weapons as needed, from heavy machine guns right up to a 105mm rifle cannon, it weighs a comparatively light 17 tons. As such, it forms the basis of new, highly mobile units referred to as brigade combat teams. Each brigade operates more than 300 Strikers of different variants. And that lighter weight contributes to the ability for an entire brigade to be airlifted and deployed anywhere in the world within 96 hours. And that speed of deployment can only happen one way: by air. While the aircraft of 1918 were extremely primitive, their obvious fighting potential saw most of the military functions of modern aircraft in place by the end of World War I, with just two notable exceptions: the cargo aircraft and the helicopter. The interwar years saw rapid developments in the range and carrying capacity of civil aircraft. And during World War II, the potential of transport aircraft was unlocked, and militaries began moving men and equipment in ways that no one had ever imagined. In December 1935, an aircraft was introduced into domestic service in the United States that many have referred to as the most important aircraft ever built: the Douglas DC-3. The smooth, round, aerodynamic shape, which minimized the drag effects of greater size, were revolutionary at the time. Combined with powerful engines and retractable undercarriage, the all-new shape gave the DC-3 a top speed of over 300 kilometers per hour, which was extraordinary for its day. As was the wing design, enabling the DC-3 to take off and land from short, unprepared airstrips. It wasn't long before its military potential was realized, and in 1939, the C-47 Skytrain was born. Differing little in appearance from its domestic cousin, slightly more powerful engines increased the C-47's top speed by 30 kilometers to 360 kilometers per hour, and left it with a usable range of 2,750 kilometers.
This aircraft was used both for troop transport and cargo. And so in many campaigns in Europe, in the Pacific, these aircraft were the prime airlift asset, really, for the Allies.
With the ability to haul 28 combat-equipped troops and to land and take off from rough fields less than 800 meters long, the C-47 could quickly deliver men and material close to the front lines. Designed for loads of up to 2,750 kilograms internally, food, medicines, ammunition, and machine parts for mechanical repairs could all suddenly be moved to the front lines by air. But perhaps the most revolutionary role undertaken by the C-47 was in airborne assault operations. Where there was no place to land, but supplies and men were needed, the C-47, with its remarkable low-speed control, was ideal for delivering them by parachute.
Really, it was the Second World War that saw the huge advent of paratrooper operations. In fact, we looked at campaigns like D-Day, where very large numbers of troops were delivered out the back of fixed-wing aircraft, like the military version of the DC-3, or in fact from gliders being towed behind these aircraft.
In all, over 10,000 C-47s in different variants saw service during World War II, deploying thousands of troops and supplies into critical combat areas. In this role, it was central to the establishment of the modern concept of airborne warfare, restoring a balance to the wartime firepower maneuverability equation. A balance that would be tipped further in favor of maneuverability with the introduction of the helicopter. Helicopters saw limited service in World War II, but the fragile design of the first truly functional helicopter, the German Focke-Wulf FW-61, spawned a number of aircraft, both German and Allied.
To that point, helicopters had existed and were used operationally, but had been piston engine powered. Those sorts of engines, of course, had been the predominantly used engines in all aircraft, really up until the end of the Second World War.
On land, personnel carriers had become the modern equivalent of the cavalry. But during the Vietnam War, the conditions worked against land-based transport. They were relatively slow-moving in the jungle terrain and easily engaged by a hidden enemy. The solution was to get the cavalry airborne in numbers that would make a difference. To achieve that required a breakthrough in engine technology. And that breakthrough came with the development of the turboshaft engine.
This French helicopter, known as Alouette II, is the first whirlybird to be fitted with a gas turbine. Up till now, speed has never been a strong point of the helicopter, but with 360 horsepower to help it along, it's quite a different story.
Whereas the engines in fixed-wing aircraft were predominantly something called a turbojet, which was utilising the exhaust thrust of the engine, the variant of the gas turbine used in helicopters was actually known as, or is known as, a turboshaft. And gas turbines actually were developed to give much better power-to-weight ratios and reliability than piston engines.
It was that dramatic change in power-to-weight output that allowed for the design of an aircraft to fill the air cavalry role. And the Americans turned to a helicopter designated the Bell UH-1, codenamed the Iroquois, but affectionately known as the Huey. The sight of Huey's landing with armed troops spilling from either side is one of the defining images of the Vietnam War. Designed from the outset to move men, its large cabin space was sufficient for 14 combat-ready troops, who gained access through large, sliding, windowed doors on either side of the fuselage. With a base crew comprised of 1 to 4 personnel, depending on the task and equipment utilized, the Huey, powered by its turboshaft engine, could vertically lift a payload of 1,750 kilograms and then move it at a top speed of 220 kilometers per hour. And like the ground and water-based machines that evolved from simple troop carriers to offensive weapons, so too did the Huey.
So gradually they became more and more armed as helicopter gunships. So with forward-firing machine guns and rockets, and also with door guns that could be fired by troops on board in support of those on the ground.
Hueys in Vietnam were called upon to fulfill a variety of roles that few aircraft of the time could match. But perhaps their greatest achievement was in medevac operations. With 6 medical litters filling the cargo space, Hueys were responsible for airlifting an estimated 90,000 injured troops through the course of the Vietnam War. While the Huey could move men quickly, battle often calls for heavy weapons to support troops. And to move heavy equipment is the task of a heavyweight, like the Boeing CH-47 Chinook.
The Chinook is a heavy lift helicopter. It was designed to be both a cargo carrying and troop carrying helicopter that first saw widespread service in the Vietnam War.
Despite being introduced in 1962, the Chinook is still one of the heaviest lifting helicopters in the world and one of the fastest in the U.S. military inventory. A durable, twin-engine tandem rotor helicopter, the Chinook was originally designed as a troop transport and supply vehicle, and as such is capable of carrying as many as 55 combat troops or 24 medical litters. In fact, in Vietnam, the Chinook transported over 670,000 passengers in its first 2 years of service alone.
But it quickly very much saw favour actually carrying equipment, particularly things like artillery.
Powered by twin turboshaft engines that have been constantly upgraded since its introduction, the Chinook can lift nearly 12 tons using 2 counter-rotating rotors that eliminate the power drain of the anti-torque tail rotor found on single-bladed helicopters.
The helicopter generates lift, not by forward motion, but by the rotation of its main rotor. And so the Chinook was able to basically double the surface area of rotors by adding a second rotor disc and simultaneously achieving the torque balance so that it could cope with different distributions of mass in the vehicle.
This makes the Chinook incredibly stable while hovering over a specific location. And so, where the Chinook really excels is in the deployment of artillery, gun crews, and transport vehicles to inaccessible locations in support of frontline troops. Using a triple hook system which provides in-fight stability, large external loads such as 155mm howitzers or armored vehicles can be transported to the front line at speeds of up to 260 kilometers per hour. For half a century, the Chinook has been central to maintaining the maneuverability of troops and equipment so essential to modern warfare. And when it started life, it shared that job of moving men with the Huey. And it continues to offer that same support to the Huey's replacement, the Blackhawk. Helicopters like the Huey and the Chinook ushered in a radically different way of fighting war. But all new methods of attack are eventually countered by adaptations in defense. And with time, the Huey became increasingly vulnerable.
While helicopters had the utility of being able to operate very close to the fight and in close support of that fight, of course, that made them targets, made them susceptible to things like shoulder-launched infrared missiles.
Enter the Blackhawk, the most widely used military transport helicopter in the world today.
The Blackhawk very much took over the role of a battlefield utility or battlefield transport from the Huey.
The Blackhawk addresses the Huey's perceived shortcomings in every respect. The first being power.
The Blackhawk is a larger, heavier, higher performance helicopter, and so it uses two engines to drive its main rotor.
Twin engines increase survivability, and with a top speed of 294 kilometers per hour and superior ballistic protection, it is far less susceptible to small arms fire. The Blackhawk incorporates a number of other design features that add flexibility to that survivability. With the capacity to carry 11 troops with equipment, it can also lift 1,200 kilograms of cargo internally, or 4,100 kilograms externally by sling, which equates to a 105mm howitzer, along with 30 rounds of ammunition and a 4-man crew in a single lift.
The Blackhawk has found application in a number of different roles.
With an armament that can include anything from machine guns to Hellfire missiles, the Blackhawk is equally accomplished in both defense and offense. In addition, it is equipped with enhanced stealth capabilities.
Any gas turbine will have a very hot exhaust plume, and that is a perfect target, both in terms of surveillance, but then also for shooting down that aircraft. And so the Blackhawk uses an infrared suppression system to try and hide and cool the hot exhaust of the engine before it is completely exhausted.
While helicopters like the Blackhawk have changed the way we fight, they still suffer from relatively slow speed, short range, and limited lifting capabilities, leading aircraft designers to search for ways to combine the attributes of both helicopters and conventional airplanes.
A helicopter will always suffer compared to a fixed-wing aircraft because it doesn't have the benefit of that forward motion to develop lift over wings. Current and future designs are looking for, can we do this better? And we are now seeing the advent of hybrid designs like the V-22 Osprey that can actually transition almost from a traditional rotating rotor blade generating lift to forward speed with pusher propellers and small winglets.
But until a truly viable solution emerges, The serious heavy lifting on the front lines will continue to be shared by helicopters and an aircraft that is the longest serving in U.S. military history, the C-130 Hercules.
The C-130 Hercules is a 4-engined, turboprop-powered transport aircraft.
Perhaps the best-known military transport aircraft in the world. The Hercules is an aircraft that continues to evolve to match the changing demands of modern warfare. First introduced in 1956, the latest variant of the Hercules, the MC-130J Commando II, meets the needs of a modern mobile attack force. With the ability to refuel an array of modern helicopters in flight and support special forces in forward operations, either by air drop or air land. It is the most recent in a series of role shifts and upgrades to a machine that began life as a simple transport aircraft. One that has retained its classic shape, a silhouette familiar to generations.
The C-130 sits sort of in the middle of the tactical and strategic role. So it's not as big as its compatriots, like the very large C-5 Galaxy or the C-17 Globemaster. So it is not optimized for intercontinental transport. It is designed, though, to be able to go into what we would call tactical airlift, where it can take payloads into unmade runways in forward operating zones.
The story of the Hercules began in 1951, with America committed to a war in Korea and an emerging requirement for a different kind of aircraft. Lockheed responded with a machine that combined the required lift capacity with low-altitude, low-speed flight control in a design that has proved incredibly adaptable. Entering service just 11 years after World War II, what the C-130 demonstrates is the incredible speed with which aircraft developed. With the capacity to carry in excess of 20,000 kilograms, the C-130 has 7 times the lift capacity of the C-47. What it provides is a platform that can deliver a sizable, fully equipped, and mobile fighting force into a war zone at a speed in excess of 600 kilometers per hour. A speed and capacity that just 10 years previous would have been unimaginable. And while never optimized for intercontinental transport, the C-130 has a range of over 4,000 kilometers, allowing for medium-range tactical operations that double the distance covered by aircraft like the C-47. And just as landing craft and personnel carriers have evolved from simple transports to take on important strike roles, the C-130 is one part of an ongoing quest for increased battlefield mobility. All modern militaries are mindful of the great human cost of war. And while we continue to have conflicts, social attitudes, combined with the reach of modern media, has created a new accountability around them. Mass deaths like those seen on the battlefields of World War I, or indiscriminate bombing like that seen in World War II, are unacceptable in the modern age. Increasingly, the technological advances of the machinery of war have resulted in a growing reliance on machines that, rather than moving men and equipment to and across the battlefield, are instead removing them from the battlefield altogether. Unmanned and autonomous machines may seem like the stuff of science fiction, but they have been slowly transforming the nature of warfare for decades. And it seems likely that the battlefields of the future will be dominated not by men, but by machines.